Woman refuses to help a man on the street, but when she discovers he's the interviewer for her dream job, she's filled with regret. The rain fell steadily over New York City, each drop hitting the pavement with a soft splatter. Marian hurried down the crowded sidewalk, her brown umbrella barely shielding her from the downpour. She was late for a meeting, her mind racing with thoughts of deadlines and the promotion she desperately wanted. The city buzzed around her, a sea of umbrellas bobbing in a rhythm that mirrored her own anxious heartbeat. As she maneuvered through the throngs of people, her gaze flickered to the side. There, huddled against a wall, sat a man wrapped in a worn, tattered coat. His disheveled hair dripped with rainwater, and his eyes, deep and sorrowful, seemed to hold a weight that Marian felt even from a distance. He looked like he had been waiting for something, or someone, for a long time. Marian's breath caught in her throat. She hesitated. Should she stop? Should she say something? A wave of guilt washed over her, but it was quickly drowned out by the thoughts of her bills piling up and the pressure to secure her job. "I can't," she whispered to herself, shaking her head slightly as if to clear her thoughts. She took a step forward, her shoes splashing in a puddle, and continued on her way. As she walked away, she felt the guilt clawing at her insides. The man's eyes haunted her, filled with a despair that mirrored her own hidden struggles. He probably has problems of his own, she thought, trying to justify her decision. But deep down, Marian knew she was just avoiding her own pain. The city moved around her, but inside, she felt more isolated than ever, like a ghost among the living. "Why do I feel this way?" she murmured under her breath, her mind racing. "I have a job, a career. I should be happy." But the truth was, Marian had long lost sight of her dreams. The city that once inspired her now felt like a trap, with the bright lights and busy streets reminding her of the happiness she used to feel. Now it was all about deadlines, meetings, and the fear of failure. The rain continued to pour as she pressed on, the noise of the city drowning out her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of the man from her mind. What if he was someone important once? What if he lost everything? The questions lingered, heavy in the air, but Marian pushed them aside, focusing instead on the tasks that awaited her at work. As she rounded a corner, she caught sight of her reflection in a shop window. Her hair was damp, and her face looked tired. "Is this who I am now?" she wondered. The woman staring back at her seemed lost, a stranger in her own life. Marian sighed, trying to shake off the sadness that threatened to engulf her. "I just need to get through today," she told herself, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Excuse me, miss," a voice called out, interrupting her thoughts. She turned to see a vendor trying to sell umbrellas. "You need a better one for this weather," he shouted, laughing. Marian forced a chuckle in response, but her heart was not in it. She waved him off, feeling the weight of her own reality pressing down harder than the rain. As she continued down the street, Marian's thoughts drifted back to the man. "Maybe I should have stopped," she admitted quietly. But the busy streets of New York swallowed her words. In that moment, she realized that it wasn't just the rain that made her feel lost, it was the growing distance between her and the world around her. And as she walked on, she couldn't help but wonder how many others felt the same way, caught in the storm of their own lives. Marian sat at her desk, the cold light of the fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead. The sound of typing and ringing phones filled the air, but her mind drifted far away from the corporate grind. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise fade as memories from her college days washed over her. Those were the times when she felt alive, full of dreams and ambitions. In her mind, she could see herself walking through the sunlit campus, surrounded by friends who shared her passion for making a difference. They often spoke about a man named Alexander, a philanthropist who dedicated his life to helping those in need. His name was always mentioned with admiration, and Marian felt inspired by his story. "Did you hear about Alexander? He gave away so much money to help the homeless," one of her friends had said excitedly over lunch one day. "He's amazing. I want to be like him," Marian had replied, her eyes shining with hope. But now, sitting in her cubicle, Marian felt a profound sense of emptiness. The dreams that once fueled her now seemed distant, overshadowed by the pressure of deadlines and the constant chase for promotions. The image of Alexander, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a ghost haunting her thoughts. She opened her eyes and glanced at the clock. The day was dragging on, and her heart sank as she thought of her responsibilities. Bills piled up on her kitchen table, and the thought of losing her job was always lurking in the back of her mind. The weight of her current life pressed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Marian, can you send those reports over?" her boss called out, snapping her back to reality. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile. But as she typed, her mind wandered back to Alexander. What had happened to him? The stories she once cherished now felt like shadows of a past that she could never reclaim. Later that evening, as she walked home through the still rainy streets of New York, she spotted a newspaper stand. A headline caught her eye: "The Fall of Philanthropist Alexander, from Hero to Homeless." Her heart raced as she reached for a copy, the words blurring together as she read. The article detailed his past achievements, his dedication to charity, and the scandal that led to his downfall. "The man I admired," she whispered to herself, feeling a deep pang of regret. How had someone who once inspired so many ended up on the streets? She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Hey lady, you got any change?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was a street vendor, his eyes weary yet hopeful. Marian shook her head, unable to find her voice as the image of Alexander flashed through her mind. She had seen him there, just a few blocks away, but she had walked past, too caught up in her own world. As she continued home, the weight of her choices settled heavily on her. She thought of the dreams she once held dear and how they felt so far away now. Marian felt inadequate, constantly comparing herself to the successful figures she once admired, like Alexander. In her small apartment, she poured herself a cup of tea, seeking comfort in the warmth of the mug. "What happened to you, Alexander?" she murmured, staring out the window at the rainy streets below. Her thoughts spiraled, and a wave of guilt washed over her. She had ignored a man who was once a hero, a man who had fought for others. Marian realized that she had become so consumed by her own struggles that she had forgotten the importance of compassion. The contrast between her life now and the idealistic vision of success from her past haunted her. She had chased a career, a promotion, but at what cost? Was this really the life she had dreamed of? As she turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Marian knew that something had to change. The whisper of her past dreams echoed in her mind, urging her to take a step beyond herself. She couldn't ignore Alexander any longer. The thought of his despair lingered like a shadow. With a newfound resolve, Marian made a promise to herself. Tomorrow would be different. She would seek out Alexander and learn his story, hoping to find a piece of the hope she had lost along the way. After a long and exhausting day at work, Marian sat on the subway, staring blankly at her phone. As the train rattled along the tracks, she absent-mindedly scrolled through her social media feed. Suddenly, an article caught her eye. It bore the name Alexander, the same name as the man she had seen on the sidewalk just days before. Intrigued, she clicked on it. The article detailed the tragic fall of a once respected philanthropist. It spoke of Alexander's dedication to helping others, of the countless lives he had touched through his charitable work. But it also revealed the scandal that had brought him down, leaving him homeless and alone. Marian's heart sank as she read about the man who had become a shadow of his former self. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. She remembered the sadness in Alexander's eyes, the way he had looked at her as she walked by. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she had chosen to ignore him, to turn her back on someone who had once given so much to the world. Marian's fingers trembled as she put her phone away. She felt a knot tightening in her stomach. What if she had stopped to talk to him? What if she had offered him a kind word or even just a moment of her time? The thought haunted her. "I could have made a difference," she murmured, her voice barely audible in the crowded subway car. As she walked home that evening, Marian could not shake the image of Alexander from her mind. She replayed their brief encounter over and over, wishing she had acted differently. The city around her felt colder, the bustling streets now a reminder of her own isolation. She felt lost, trapped in her own worries about work and life, while someone like Alexander had once given everything to help others. Arriving at her apartment, she tossed her bag aside and sank into the couch. The walls of her small space felt like they were closing in on her. She pulled out her phone once more, searching for more information about Alexander. The more she read, the more she felt compelled to understand him, to know the man behind the despair she had seen on the street. "Why did I ignore him?" she asked herself aloud. "He deserves better." Determination began to replace her guilt. Marian knew she had to do something. She decided she would go back to that corner of the city where she had first seen him. "I need to make amends," she thought resolutely. "I need to know his story." The next day, Marian found herself pacing in her apartment, her heart racing at the thought of facing Alexander again. She rehearsed what she would say, trying to calm her nerves. "Just be honest," she told herself. "He might need a friend." As she stepped out into the bustling streets, the weight of her decision pressed down on her. She walked quickly, navigating through the sea of people, her mind racing with possibilities. What if he didn't want to talk? What if he remembered her from before? Finally, she reached the spot where she had first seen him. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the area. For a moment, she didn't see him. A wave of disappointment washed over her. Maybe he moved on, she thought, trying to quell her rising anxiety. Just then, she spotted him sitting against the wall, a tattered coat wrapped around him. His eyes were closed, and for a brief moment, he seemed at peace. Marian took a deep breath, stepping closer. "Alexander," she called softly, unsure of how to approach him. At the sound of her voice, he opened his eyes. They were filled with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Marian swallowed hard, her resolve faltering for a moment. I came to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry for ignoring you the other day. I read about you, and I feel terrible." He regarded her with a piercing gaze, as if trying to read her intentions. "Why do you care now?" he replied, his tone guarded. "Because I should have cared then," Marian admitted, her heart racing. "I want to understand what happened to you. To know your story." Alexander studied her for a long moment before his expression softened slightly. "You really want to know?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his defenses. "Yes," Marian replied earnestly. "I do. I want to listen." At that moment, the walls between them began to crumble. Marian felt a spark of hope as she took a seat beside him, ready to learn about the man she had once overlooked. Marian stood at the corner of the street, her heart racing. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with the scent of damp pavement. She looked down the sidewalk where she had first seen Alexander. Memories of his sad eyes filled her mind, and a mix of fear and hope swirled within her. She hesitated, her feet glued to the ground. What if he didn't want to talk? What if he didn't remember her? Taking a deep breath, Marian stepped forward. Each stride felt like a leap into the unknown. As she approached, she could see Alexander sitting on the same worn blanket, his back hunched over. He looked older than she remembered, the lines on his face deepening as he stared blankly at the ground. Excuse me?" Marian's voice wavered slightly, betraying her nervousness. Alexander slowly lifted his head, his expression a mix of surprise and caution. "Yes?" he replied, his voice rough from disuse. Marian swallowed hard, her heart pounding. I saw you here before. I'm sorry I didn't stop to talk. I've been thinking about it a lot." He looked at her for a moment, searching her face for sincerity. "People don't usually come back," he said quietly. "I know," Marian admitted, feeling a wave of guilt wash over her. "I ignored you, and I regret it. I read about you, about who you used to be." A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "You mean the articles?" "Yes," she nodded, her voice steadying. "I didn't realize how much you had done for others. I wish I had taken the time to talk to you then." Alexander shifted slightly, his posture less defensive. Most people only see what's on the surface. They don't want to know the truth. Marian took a seat on the curb beside him, the cold concrete seeping through her clothes. "I want to know," she said earnestly. "I want to understand. Can you tell me your story?" For a moment, Alexander was silent. Then, he began to share. "I was once someone who believed in making a difference. I started programs to help the homeless, to give them hope. But when the scandal hit, everything changed. People turned their backs on me." Marian listened intently, her heart aching for him. "What happened?" she asked gently. "The media twisted my actions. They painted me as a villain. I lost my job, my reputation, everything." His voice trembled, but he continued. "I ended up here, alone. People just walk past without seeing me." "I'm sorry," Marian said softly, wishing she could take away his pain. "I can't imagine how hard that must be." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "What about you? You seem troubled too." Marian hesitated, unsure if she should share her own struggles. But there was something in his gaze that encouraged her. "I feel lost," she confessed. "I'm stuck in a job that doesn't make me happy. I used to have dreams, but now I'm just trying to keep up with bills and promotions. I've forgotten what it means to care." Alexander nodded slowly. "You're not alone in that. Many people get caught up in the grind, but it's never too late to find your way back." Marian felt a spark of hope igniting within her. "Maybe we can help each other," she suggested. "I could bring you food and supplies, and you could share your stories. I want to learn from you." He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You really mean that?" "Yes," Marian replied, her determination shining through. "I want to understand more about life, about people. I want to make a difference, even if it's small." A small smile broke through Alexander's somber demeanor. "Okay, I'd like that. I have a lot of stories to share. Maybe it's time I let someone in." As they continued to talk, the air between them shifted. The initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a sense of connection. Marian realized that this meeting marked a turning point for both of them. In sharing their struggles, they began to bridge the gap between their worlds, discovering the strength that comes from empathy and understanding. Marian found herself returning to the same spot in New York City where she had first encountered Alexander. Each time she walked through the bustling streets, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. She wanted to know him better, to understand the man behind the sad eyes she had once ignored. Today was different. She had made a plan. With a bag of sandwiches and some warm clothes in hand, Marian approached Alexander. He was sitting on the sidewalk, leaning against the wall, his eyes closed, as if he were resting. She took a deep breath, her heart racing. "Hey, Alexander," she said softly, hoping to catch his attention. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by a cautious smile. "Marian," he replied. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I wanted to bring you something," she said, kneeling down beside him. She placed the bag on the ground between them. "I hope you like sandwiches." "Thank you," he said, a hint of warmth in his voice. As he reached for the bag, she noticed the way his hands trembled slightly. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," she insisted. "I've been thinking a lot since we last talked. I want to know more about you." Alexander paused, his expression shifting to one of curiosity. "What do you want to know?" he asked, taking a bite of the sandwich. Marian watched him closely, noticing how he savored each bite. "Everything," she replied, her voice steady. "You've been through so much. I want to understand your story." With a sigh, Alexander leaned back against the wall. "It's a long story, Marion," he said, gazing out at the busy street. "But I guess it starts with my dreams. I used to have big plans, just like you." Marion's heart ached at his words. "What happened?" she asked gently. "Life happened," he replied, looking down at the ground. "I lost my job, my family, everything. It's easy to get lost in a city like this." His voice was low, filled with a sadness that resonated with her. Marion felt a pang of guilt. "I can't imagine how hard that must be. I've been so caught up in my own life that I didn't even see you. I'm sorry for that." "It's okay," he reassured her. "People often don't see what they don't want to see. It's easier to walk by and pretend everything is fine." Marion nodded, a knot forming in her stomach. "How do you stay strong?" she asked, genuinely curious. Alexander looked at her, his eyes shining with a spark of determination. "I try to find hope in the little things. A warm meal, a nice conversation. They matter. They remind me that I'm still here, still alive." Marion felt inspired by his words. "I want to help," she said, her voice firm. "Maybe we can do something together? Raise awareness about homelessness or something?" "Now that's an idea," Alexander replied, a smile returning to his face. "You have a fire in you, Marion. That's good." He paused, as if weighing his next words. "But it's not just about helping others. It's about finding purpose for yourself too." Marion blinked, taken aback. "I've been feeling lost," she admitted. "My job, my life. It all feels so empty sometimes." "Then maybe this is your chance," Alexander suggested, his voice soothing. "You're not just helping me, you're helping yourself too. It's a journey for both of us." Marion considered his words, feeling a shift within her. "You're right," she said slowly. "I want to make a difference, for both of us." They sat together for a while, sharing stories and laughter. With each passing moment, Marion felt her fears begin to fade. In Alexander, she saw a reflection of her own struggles, but she also saw strength and resilience. Their friendship was blossoming, and with it came a new sense of purpose. As they finished their sandwiches, Marion looked at Alexander with renewed determination. "I'll be back next week. Let's talk more about what we can do together. I'll be here," he promised, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And I'll be ready to share more." With a smile, Marion stood up, her heart lighter than before. She walked away from the sidewalk, knowing this was just the beginning of a journey that would change them both forever. Marion stood in the small community center, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. The day had finally come for the event she had organized to raise awareness for homelessness and honor Alexander's past contributions. She had spent weeks planning every detail, inviting people from different walks of life, and preparing the space. The walls were decorated with colorful posters, and a table was filled with information about local shelters and support services. As the guests began to arrive, Marion greeted them with a warm smile. She noticed a mix of familiar faces and new ones. Some were her colleagues, while others were community members who had heard about the event through social media. The atmosphere buzzed with conversation and curiosity. "Marion, this looks amazing," said Sarah, one of her co-workers, as she stepped inside. Sarah had always been supportive, and Marion appreciated her presence. "Thank you, Sarah. I really hope it makes a difference," Marion replied, trying to keep her voice steady. As more people filled the room, Marion caught sight of Alexander standing off to the side. He looked a bit uncertain, but there was a spark of pride in his eyes. She walked over to him, feeling a mix of gratitude and admiration. "Are you ready?" she asked him gently. Alexander nodded, his expression serious. "I've never done anything like this before, Marion. What if they don't want to listen?" Marion placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "They will. Your story matters. You have so much to share, and I know it will inspire others." With a deep breath, Alexander stepped forward as Marian introduced him to the crowd. "Everyone, thank you for coming today. I want you to meet someone special," she said, her voice confident. "This is Alexander. He has a powerful story that can help us understand homelessness better." The crowd turned their attention to Alexander, who stood a little taller now. Marian stepped aside, giving him the space he needed. "Hello everyone," he began, his voice steady yet soft. "My name is Alexander. I once had a life that I thought was perfect. I was a philanthropist, helping those in need, until life took some unexpected turns." Marian watched as Alexander spoke, his eyes lighting up as he shared his journey. He talked about his early days, the joy he felt in helping others, and the events that led to his downfall. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. "I lost everything," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I learned that people are more than their circumstances. I want you all to remember that." As he finished, the audience erupted into applause. Marian felt a wave of warmth wash over her. People began approaching Alexander, asking questions and expressing their support. She watched as he engaged with them, his confidence growing with each interaction. "Thank you for sharing your story, Alexander," one woman said, tears in her eyes. "It's so important for us to hear this." Marian felt her heart swell with pride. She knew this event was more than just an awareness campaign. It was a moment of connection. As the afternoon went on, conversations flourished. Guests shared their own experiences, and many expressed a desire to help those in need. Marian moved through the crowd, listening and smiling, feeling a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Later, as the event began to wind down, Marian found Alexander sitting quietly in a corner. She approached him, her heart full. "You were incredible today," she said, beaming. "I didn't expect it to feel this way," Alexander replied, a humble smile on his face. "It felt good to be heard." Marian nodded, her eyes shining. "You are heard, Alexander, and you matter. You've inspired so many people today." As they shared a moment of silence, Marian realized something profound. True success was not about climbing the corporate ladder or receiving accolades. It was about the connections they made and the lives they touched. "Let's keep this going," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "We can create a regular meetup, a place for people to share and learn." Alexander's face lit up. "I would love that. We can build a community together." As they talked about their plans, Marian felt a renewed sense of hope and direction. She knew they were just beginning a journey that could change lives, including their own. The world outside remained busy, but inside the community center, they had created a space where empathy and understanding could grow. Share this story if you believe that compassion can bridge the gap between understanding and action. Leave a comment about how a moment of connection has impacted your life, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Let's continue to raise awareness and foster empathy together.